Would you like your garden to be gloriously full of tulips in spring? I'm here at Hever Castle with head gardener Neil Miller to talk about how to grow tulips in your garden. It's Alexandra here from the Middle Sized Garden YouTube channel and blog, and Hever Castle is famous for its tulips. Hever Castle was transformed into one of the greatest gardens in England by William Astor in the 1920s, and it's probably the garden where the most has been spent on beautiful things like colonnades and an Italianate garden and a rose garden, and so it is absolutely stunning. I'll put links to Hever Castle in the description below and to any other resources we mention. And there's also timestamps, so if you need to jump to a particular question, then you can do that by clicking on the time. If you're new here, the Middle Sized Garden uploads once a week with tips, ideas and inspiration for your garden. And if you'd like to see the videos when you open up YouTube, then click the subscribe button. It's absolutely free. If you'd like YouTube to tell you when a new video is uploaded, then click the notifications bell. So are tulips easy to grow?
They are, surprising enough. Anyone can grow them in pots, in gardens. So I wouldn't kind of be worried about if you think, oh, shall I grow them? Shall I grow them? Just go for it. They are extremely easy and look after themselves. Obviously, if you grow them in a really sunny position, they will obviously not flower as long. But if you kind of plant tulips in the sun and the shade, you get their progression. Here at Hever Castle, on the south part of the garden, the tulips that you'll see later are kind of fully out, but on the north part, they're about a week and a half behind.
So when should we be planting tulips? How late can we leave it, for example?
Yeah, because the tulips, they're one of the bulbs, the spring bulbs that you can leave late. If you kind of plant them slightly earlier, they're more kind of prone to a bit of infection and bacterial disease. So we kind of plant ours in November, but really, you at a push, end of the year, kind of, even going on to the new year, January really. With tulips, the later the better. They will flower eventually. You can actually plant them in March and April, but they're less likely to flower this year, but the following year.
How do you plant tulips?
Again, with tulips, 3 times the depth. If you make a hole in the soil, pop him in, pop the soil over, you kind of leave him be, but then just keep an eye out on the squirrels. Squirrels love tulip bulbs. It's like nectar and caviar to them.
And what can you do to protect your tulips against squirrels?
We have, again, if they're in pots, very straightforward, just put some little chicken wire over the pots, and as soon as they start shooting, the squirrels will leave them alone. They love to eat the dormant bulbs. A couple of years ago at Hever, we had a few experiments of trying to deter the squirrels, and we found that chili flakes and garlic powder, just sprinkled very lightly over the soil, actually deters the squirrels. A lot of people say old-fashioned, the mothballs, lots of other different kind of things, but we've got the chili powder and the garlic. If you go to that expense, a little sprinkle, and the squirrels will go next door.
And so that's just after you planted them?
Just after you
plant them. And then once they've been in for a while, the squirrels won't...
That's right, yeah. As soon as they start shooting, the squirrels will move on to something else.
Do tulips grow in pots? And if so, what tips do you have?
Yeah, tulips in pots, again, you kind of have to look at what pot you would like to kind of grow them in. Ideally terracotta. A lot of people, we do have plastic pots in our gardens, but terracotta is much better because the bulb and the soil will actually breathe. So it will change temperature rather than being in a plastic pot. It could overheat or could get over cold. And just have a look at the size of your pot and just have a look at the size of the actual kind of tulip. So really pop them in, and they really will. I don't want to make it too complicated. They will look after themselves and you'll enjoy them so much.
So how do we care for our tulips?
Yeah, the aftercare, again, very simple, but like kind of most kind of plants and things, like once the flower has finished, you'll know it because the petals will just fall off. Just snip off the top of the petals and the top part. You don't want the tulip to start to procreate and make seed. If it starts to make seed, it will make the bulb weaker. So you want all the goodness to go back into the bulb. So take the top off the tulip. Just the long stem is the best thing. Let it die down. You're going to have a bit of an untidy garden for a few weeks because you want all the foliage to kind of flop down and go yellow. And then probably 6 weeks later, you'll go along and you'll just be able to pick up the foliage and the bulb will stay in the ground. If you start cutting the foliage too soon, it's not going to feed the bulb, and next year, you probably won't get a flower on it. But just let Mother Nature be patient. If you're patient, you'll benefit the following year. And then just as a little added bonus for next year, just a bit of general fertiliser, like the phosphagen, just a sprinkle over the top, and that will leach into the kind of soil, into the bulb, and it will just give it a bit more energy for it to pop up next year.
And when you're spreading that phosphagen, is that just after it's flowered?
Just after it's flowered, that's
Yes.
right. Just so the goodness kind of goes back in. It kind of helps it all burst back into life for the following year.
If my tulip hasn't flowered, what is the most likely cause?
Sometimes a tulip won't flower the following year just because it's having a wee rest. Tulips technically flower best the first year. Sometimes the bulb may be a bit too near the surface. A tulip should flower each year, and it's probably key thing just to give it that feed, because you'll probably get a tulip that'll come up lovely kind of green leaves and that lot, but no flower. So just that general kind of purpose fertiliser at the end of the season just to give it a boost. But I wouldn't worry too much, because if it doesn't flower one year, I can near enough guarantee the next year it should flower in some shape or form. But I wouldn't get too worried about it.
So what about tulips that come back well? Are there specific kinds of tulips that come back well?
The main ones, a lot of the kind of the cultivated, the hybrid ones, the real big blousy ones, they will come back each year, but you can't really guarantee the quality of them. They may be a bit stunted, the flower may be not too. But if you look in the brochures and online, it's the species ones, the little kind of that 100%, if I say tulip one, the ones you have on rockeries, they tend to be rather smallish, but if you really want those kind of the wild looking ones, they will prolifically continue year after year at the same kind of standard.
And what plants go best with tulips?
With tulips, because they're such an amazing colour, you know, I don't know of any other species that has that variety of colour, pinks, oranges, you have reds and greens on one. So we kind of underplant it with kind of the spring bedding. Any kind of bedding plants really, or just in clumps in your herbaceous border. This time of year, the herbaceous border's it's shooting up, but if you had clumps of tulips I like to plant the same variety in one kind of bed. But yeah, everyone's taste is different. But I think there's a home, any part of one's garden, just for a small clump of tulips.
I've also come to talk tulips with Sue Oriel, who runs Country Lane Flowers from her home in Kent with her business partner Stephanie Bates. And Sue's got a middle-sized garden. It's not acres and acres, and in fact she grows the flowers for Country Lane Flowers in what was the vegetable patch. And last autumn she planted 2,500 tulips for her niece's wedding at the beginning of May. Now that's had to be postponed, but Sue has learnt an enormous amount about planting tulips, particularly quite densely and for cutting, and so she's agreed to talk to us about that. I'll put a link to Country Lane Flowers and also to the names of any tulips you see in this video in the description below. I don't know the names of all the tulips, but where I do know the names of the tulips, I'll put them in the description below, linked to the timestamp, so you can just see exactly which tulip is which. So Sue, you've planted your tulips very densely. When I asked Neil Miller at Hever Castle how you plant tulips, he said plant them to the depth of 3 times the bulb. But taking that you're planting your tulips very densely to get the most in there, what's your advice?
Well, if you're planting for cropping as opposed to in your garden, and I'll come back to the garden bit in a sec, you do plant them about as deep as Neil is talking about, around about 5 or 6 inches down. But the way we planted those was to empty the whole flower bed out, then we dug down the whole thing. We then put feed at the bottom. We didn't put any grit in it. That's very old-fashioned now, to grit under bulbs, because they make little pools of water where the grit is, rather than drain away. It doesn't work like that. Then we laid out all the tulips, and there must have been at a spacing of around about a tulip's bulb distance between tulip bulbs. So the big sin is touching. You mustn't have them touching. They're slightly more dense than the manufacturer would recommend, because the manufacturer of the bulb is advising you for your garden, not for cropping. So in a square metre, you could get anything up to, a couple of 100 bulbs, and then we put the compost back over the top, and then we put some more food over that, and then some more compost over that, and then said goodnight. And that was around about middle of November.
And what kind of food were you using?
We used garden compost, and we used bloodfish and bone.
So have you had to do anything to the tulips over the winter?
Amazingly, I've watered them in the last 6 weeks because it's been dry as a bone round here, and I was noticing a slight smallness about their foliage, which sometimes goes with being too dry. And given that they're so close together, they're going to compete with each other for moisture. So I did give them a good water, and it was really noticeable how they just moved on a bit straight after that.
And that presumably is once the leaves appeared, you wouldn't water them while they're still under the ground?
Absolutely not, because we have very heavy clay soil here. Even though I've changed it, they are on a base of clay. They could sit on something very cold and solid for the winter, which is complete death to tulip.
And what other things have you discovered about growing tulips very densely like this?
Anything that looked vaguely mouldy, not full-sized, had a baby growing on it already, out it went. Because you just don't want to bother with something that it has its very best chance of being perfect when it comes up.
So let's talk about what plants go well with tulips. At Hever Castle, I saw some lovely contrasts. For example, some tall white tulips with very low dark violas or pansies. And also some lovely pink Candy Prince tulips with bright blue aubrietia on a wall behind. They also had some harmonious effects. There were wallflowers, which were spring bedding, and the tulips and the wallflowers together made a kind of spectrum of yellows, oranges and reds. Neil also takes into account what the evergreens are doing near the tulips. And I particularly like this Pittosporum Tom Thumb with its dark copper foliage, which looks great with the stripy candy stripes of Abu Hassan tulips. But also, I personally love tulips against emerging rose foliage, which Sue has in her garden and which I have in mine, and also with emerging peony foliage. Although obviously when you're planting bulbs very close to roses, you'll have to make sure that the roses are well fed, because roses don't really like a lot of competition around their roots. And when it comes to planting tulips in the garden, what do you like to plant tulips with?
In the garden, it depends which bit of the garden, because my garden comes into sort of different spaces. In my cottage garden, which I think we've talked about before, I do love an underplant of a tulip, or a juxtaposition. So in there, I like a tulip with a lovely bit of forget-me-not underneath, usually just self-seeded around. I just shake them out when they've gone. I really like that because the delicacy of the forget-me-nots really shows off the kind of solidity of a tulip, because it is quite a solid plant when it comes down to it, and very upright. The forget-me-nots do a lovely wafty thing underneath. I love that. I've got them next to roses, as you say, and you're right, you feed them like mad straight after. In a field where I've got a big wiggly path of daffodils, which are all pheasant size, I've actually broken that up ever so slightly with clumps of tulips. So my preferred way of planting them is very naturalistic, the usual groups, 11s, 17s, 26s. I don't do 2s and 3s. I like lots of things all together because I think on their own they look a little bit sad. When they're all clumped together, they're positively joyous in the sunshine.
And what about the bulbs that you're growing for cutting? Do you leave those in the ground year on year?
Absolutely not. We treat them as an annual. In fact, to maintain the cut-picked life of a tulip, you wouldn't actually take it from the bulb. You dig it up, bulb and all. And if you want to preserve the flowers for maybe, you could, as long as another week before you cut the bulb off to sell, you put them in your fridge. And you can put them at about 4 degrees in a regular fridge with the bulb on, wrapped in newspaper, and they'll last absolutely fantastically for up to a week. If you cut the bulb off, that doesn't work. But no, we treat them as annuals, absolutely.
So when you're harvesting, you actually dig the whole bulb up with the tulip flower attached?
Absolutely.
My goodness, I didn't know that.
The other thing I would say about a tulip is that a homegrown tulip and a flower farmed tulip will continue growing in the vase, much more than a supermarket bought, shipped in plant, which is pretty much dead by the time you've got it. Although apparently alive, it's not got any joie de vivre left in it. If you have one that's local and that's travelled nowhere, it's not been frozen in a big ship or anything like that, put it in the vase and it'll start growing. So if you want straight flowers, wrap them up and make sure that you put them in water and condition them for a couple of hours first, and that will have them continue growing straight. If you put them straight in water, they can do all sorts of artistic, curvy things in your vase, and it's entirely up to you whether you like that or you don't. But a British grown tulip straight in from the ground to the vase will last anything up to 2 weeks, which is almost double what a supermarket tulip will.
If you love growing colourful flowers in your garden, we've got a playlist called Flower Colour, which covers flowers like hydrangeas, dahlias and irises. And if there's a flower you'd like me to feature, then do tell me in the comments below and I'll find a grower or head gardener who can tell us all about how to grow that flower. And if you'd like more tips, ideas and inspiration, then do subscribe to the Middle Sized Garden YouTube channel. And thank you for watching. Goodbye.